Hello and welcome to PrimeTime at the Wire. I'm Siddharth Varadarajan. We are less than 2 weeks away from the first phase of the 2024 Lok Sabha election. And already there is a debate and a controversy surrounding the functioning of the Election Commission of India, which is supposed to act as an independent supervisory and monitoring body for the conduct of free and fair elections, but whose behavior and whose conduct has itself come under something of a cloud. We have with us today as a guest Mr. E.A.S. Sharma, former Revenue Secretary at the Union of India, and of course, a very vocal voice in favor of democracy and transparency. He is, I would say, even more vigilant than the most vigilant of journalists in raising questions about government conduct and the conduct of different authorities in India and drawing their attention to their obligations under the Constitution. So, Mr. Sharma, welcome to The Wire. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I want to start with, since we are talking about the prospect of free and fair election and the conduct of the Election Commission, I want to start with two letters that you wrote recently. Complaint letters, as it were, or letters drawing the attention of the Election Commission of India to violations of what you said were violations of the Model Code of Conduct by no less a person than Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And you referred to two of his recent speeches, one in Tamil Nadu, where he referred to Shakti and, in a way, kind of accused Rahul Gandhi and the Congress of being anti-Hindu in some way, and the other at the Reserve Bank of India, where he asked the RBI to be ready from day one because he had an active agenda for when he comes back as Prime Minister. Now, talk us through why you believe what the Prime Minister said in these two speeches violates the Model Code of Conduct.
I actually heard Rahul Gandhi's speech where he said Shakti, there's a power, invisible power. It's not so much Mr. Modi, but there is a power acting behind them, and that we should fight it. No, that has nothing to do with religion. I mean, as far as I understand, any reasonable person, if he listens to that, nothing to do with religion. Now, Mr. Modi in Tamil Nadu, equated with Shakti, the Mariamma and Kamakshi Devi and all that. I think, it's very unbecoming of the Prime Minister of India to distort somebody's speech and then attribute a religious angle to that. So I thought that was a very clear violation of the Model Code of Conduct. So I wrote to the Election Commission.
Which prohibits the use of religion as a method of campaigning.
Yeah. See, in fact, you are not supposed to, try to appeal to the voters on the basis of religious grounds, caste grounds, creed grounds, and all that. I think it's prima facie a violation of the Model Code of Conduct. So I wrote to the Election Commission. Now they did not reply. So I reminded them. Are you afraid of the Prime Minister? Because earlier in Gujarat elections, I registered 2 complaints against the Home Minister, and they never even bothered. Under Right to Information Act, under Section 4, any public authority, Election Commission is a public authority, they are supposed to suo moto, make a disclosure of what they are doing. And this Election Commission does not wish to be transparent. Now, the second complaint which I lodged against Mr. Modi on his RBI speech, it's a purely government function. And what he did was he foreclosed the election of India, as though the elections are not required. And he is already the Prime Minister for the next term. And then he was telling the people there, I don't know whether it's a threat or appeal, whatever it is. So I brought it to the notice of the Election Commission of India. They did not act on that.
Right. And even for your complaint on the RBI issue,
no, there's no response. I don't find any order. I don't mind if they dispose it off saying there's nothing in that. Yeah. You can always pass an order saying that there is no material, it doesn't violate the Model Code of Conduct, then I'll contest. But he is not giving me an opportunity to contest.
Now, I recall, Mr. Sharma, back in 2019, the last Lok Sabha election, there was a complaint made by the Congress party and by others after a speech, rather controversial speech that Mr. Modi made. I believe it was in Wardha in 2019, when in the midst of the Lok Sabha campaign, he attacked Rahul Gandhi, who was then the leader of the Congress party, for standing from Wayanad in Kerala. And the phrase that Mr. Modi used was that he kind of mocked Rahul Gandhi for finding a microscope that could help him locate one place in India where the majority was in a minority. And the allusion clearly was to the fact that Wayanad as a constituency had fewer Muslim voters than fewer Hindu voters than Muslim. And that's why Mr. Rahul Gandhi went there. And this is, again, a clear allusion to religion, a clear attempt to appeal to religion, because soon after that, Mr. Modi also reminded his voters how the Congress party had accused certain Hindutva activists of being terrorists, and he said, how could they be terrorists? So anyway, somebody filed a complaint, and for weeks on end, the Election Commission refused to act on this. And it was only after the Congress party went to the Supreme Court to demand that the EC take action, and the Supreme Court gave an ultimatum, that the Election Commission finally ruled. But its ruling, apart from being predictable, in other words, they said, we find no violation by Mr. Modi. What was surprising was that it gave no logic. It gave no reason at all. And we learned subsequently that one of the three election commissioners, Mr. Ashok Lavasa, had actually chosen to dissent, although even that information was never made public at the time, nor was any of the documentation related to this complaint and its adjudication made public then or even now. In your view, is there some kind of a mechanism that should be in place whereby the public as a whole can see which are the complaints that have been received, what date were they logged, who sat in on the meeting to adjudicate on them, and what was the logic on the basis of which the complaint was either accepted or rejected? Is this something that people have a reasonable right to demand of the Election Commission?
No, there is an e-vigil, as they call it, an e-vigil sort of, box in the Election Commission of India portal. But then, it's very difficult to access anything in that. I've tried. It's not easy. See, my point is that when you make a complaint, normally, these days of electronic communication, you can send me an acknowledgement. They can send me an acknowledgement. It's nothing great or difficult. It's not rocket science. And then they can say, we are following it up. And then they can send a reply by email or by WhatsApp. There are so many ways to say. But the Election Commission, apparently, they do not want to do that. See, they do not want to function transparently because my impression, though I would not like to believe it, is that the Election Commission is afraid of the Prime Minister, the Home Minister. They don't want to ruffle the feathers. They don't want to ask them questions. No, you cannot, the India's democracy cannot be sustained with an Election Commission of this kind, this kind of election commissioners. When I've seen other election commissioners, many are remembered forever. But in my complaint, I sent one reminder to the Election Commission on the Tamil Nadu speech, where I said, many people are remembered and some people are not remembered. You please choose to which category you belong. The whole idea is, I think the Election Commission, three election commissioners should know that they're actually sinecure jobs, post-retirement jobs. How many officers get that kind of an assignment? And they're paid very heavy salaries. Not everybody gets that opportunity. So at least, they should feel accountable to the people of India. And, they are supposed to speak on behalf of the people. And they should put the political executive with their backs at really drive them to defend themselves. But that is not happening, which is very, very worrisome.
When you said that you wrote in, you fear that the election commissioners are actually afraid of the Prime Minister and Home Minister. I was reminded of, again, what happened to Mr. Lavasa in 2019, because it's a reasonable question for a viewer to wonder about. That what does an EC, what does an election commissioner have to fear? At the end of the day, we're talking of people who are in a way constitutional functionaries. They cannot be dismissed by the government of the day in such an easy fashion. Why would they be afraid? And then I look at the example of Ashok Lavasa, who was the dissenting election commissioner in the 2019 Lok Sabha elections and found against Mr. Modi, and I believe in a couple of other instances too. And shortly after the election ended, a spate of stories began appearing in, I believe it was the Indian Express and perhaps a couple of other media outlets, as to how the income tax department was investigating Mr. Lavasa for the purchase of a flat, and that there were certain irregularities in his financial statements and so on and so forth. So there was an attempt kind of to create this sort of allegation of corruption around Mr. Lavasa, and perhaps it was used to browbeat him. We know subsequently also, because the Wire was part of the Pegasus project, that Mr. Lavasa's mobile number was in the database of numbers that were potential targets of Pegasus spyware being used by, in this case, the government of India. But essentially, Mr. Lavasa chose at that point to resign from the election commission. So instead of staying on, and he was perhaps the first election commissioner that I could recall who actually resigned from his job and didn't go on to complete his term. And had he actually completed his term, he would have gone on to become chief election commissioner. So it was kind of unusual for a person to quit, but clearly some form of pressure was brought to bear. And one can only imagine that this was done because he defied the power. Hi, sorry, we're back on. So I'll just retake the last bit. So even though you have an election commissioner who cannot be dismissed, but yet the government clearly has a method of exerting power, which kind of brings me to the next set of questions, Mr. Sharma, which is that I know that you have written to the election commissioners about. You've proposed that there should be a model code of conduct for the ECs themselves, and clearly, the a central part of the model code of conduct is transparency and fearlessness. But could you highlight, for the benefit of our viewers who wouldn't have read your proposal, what are the salient features of your proposed model code of conduct for election commissioners themselves?
The whole idea is that a constitutional authority like the Election Commission cannot be legitimate unless it follows the constitutional requirements. Now, I mentioned in my letters that there is a judgment of the Constitution bench of the Supreme Court and earlier court judgments that Article 324 gives a reservoir of power to the Election Commission. They can do many things. See, one of the things they could do is, like they do in the case of the state government officials, they can bring all the central government enforcement agencies like Enforcement Directorate, CBI and others, income tax and all that, under their supervision. When they, act against opposition leaders, officers and all that, at least during the model code of conduct period, they can take them under their surveillance. I mean, this is possible. If an election commission wishes to do that, they can issue an order saying, before you, please don't conduct raids unnecessarily. And if you want to do it, please at least inform us. So that kind of thing they could do. They could put the fear of God in the system because their mandate is to conduct elections in a free and fair manner, in a political manner. All political parties should have,
So if I can just stop you for a second. I mean, what you're saying essentially is that, let's say in the state of Tamil Nadu or West Bengal, if the police commissioner were to begin arrests and harassment of BJP leaders, or in the case of Tamil Nadu, AIA, DMK leaders, or whatever, you're saying the election commission would have the authority to intervene and tell the West Bengal police or the Tamil Nadu police to stop doing that. And the question that you're raising is, what about the police powers that the central government, that the union government wields? And we've seen on the eve of elections, the Enforcement Directorate, the Income Tax Authority, and the CBI being used to target opposition leaders. And you're saying that the EC enjoys similar powers to constrain the functioning of these union government agencies too? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, because the Enforcement Directorate today
Yes,
He's not a regular enforcement director. The person who is heading that, he's actually in charge enforcement director.
that's
I
right.
mean, I
That's
thought, you
right.
see, common sense,
Yeah,
tells you that this can be manipulated by the government. So
right.
during the model code of conduct period, it could take it and say, look, I will supervise. That kind of
Yes,
thing, to give a lot of confidence to the political parties. It could be done if an election commission realizes its authority under Article 324 for the sake of conducting free and fair elections, and also for the sake of eliciting confidence from the public and the other political parties. It can do it. So this is one thing. And of course, the election commission should be really acting on behalf of the people of India, not the political executive. They should be, for example, when the electronic voting machines, when the opposition delegation wanted to meet the election commission, they didn't want to. Why? Why don't you meet? Why are you not accessible to all political parties?
right.
And I've also suggested one thing in my so-called model code of conduct for the three election commissioners. I said, you take the electoral bonds. I mean, it has come out, the scam. It's one of the biggest electoral scams in India. Right from the beginning, I have been opposing this electoral bonds. Right from Foreign Contribution Regulation Act case, we have been opposing. Now, for example, BJP today is sitting on thousands of crores of unspent money, and that money is not covered by the Supreme Court judgment. Now, I personally believe that since electoral bond scheme itself is illegal, unconstitutional, and since most of this money is associated with intimidation, threat, and even quid pro quos,
Good propose.
kickbacks kind of thing, I think the election commission should step in and say, I freeze that amount. Don't spend it during elections. You cannot spend even a single rupee from that. I mean, this is something which anybody with a common sense, with anybody with a democratic
Yeah.
sense, would demand the election commission. Why are they not doing it? So this is the problem in my letter.
And you're
I
saying, in your reference to Article 324 of the Constitution, you're saying an important thing. You are saying that the Supreme Court ruled that on any issue where Parliament is silent about establishing limits to the EC's conduct and power, the EC should look at Article 324 as what the court said is a reservoir of power. They can actually invent new rules and arrogate to themselves authority that is not explicitly spelt out.
absolutely, that's what Mr. Session
Yes.
did. And the other thing is that they can issue directives. Say, for example, the directives to the government to do certain things during this time. It's
Yeah.
enormous power. It's for the election commission to decide. And if they don't exercise that authority, they're committing a breach of Article 324. You see, the framers of the Constitution have given
Yeah.
the authority. The Supreme Court has interpreted that particular article. After all that, they're so hesitant, and they want to act as appendages to the government. They're almost like then why have an election commission at all? I
So
mean,
far
you
from
can also,
so far from uh, actually looking for ways to expand their power in service of the conduct of free and fair elections, actually what you have found through your engagements with the election commission, the fact that you've written letters, not got a response, and so on, is that even existing powers, such as enforcing the model code of conduct, is something the commission is extremely reluctant to do, essentially because they lack the courage to confront what are manifest violations by the Prime Minister and other senior leaders of the BJP. Which, of course, Mr. Sharma, brings us to the question which I want to address in the last 10 minutes of this show now, which is, I suppose everything depends on who these election commissioners are and what the process is by which they are selected. Now, one of the areas in which the Constitution, unfortunately, was silent is that even though it spoke of the need and the importance of an election commissioner, the founding fathers and mothers of the Republic chose not to spell out a mechanism whereby the election commissioner, as it was envisaged then, or the commissioners subsequently, could be chosen in such a way that they wouldn't be beholden to the executive. And of course, for many years, we had election commissioners who were picked by the executive, but about who's functioning, there wasn't too much of controversy. It's very rare that one heard allegations that a particular election commissioner was biased this way or that. One heard this a little bit about Mr. Naveen Chola or somebody else. But in the main, even though the process of selection was stacked in favor of the executive, we never really had too much of a problem. In the last few years, the matter, of course, has come up before the Supreme Court. And a couple of years back, the Supreme Court, pretty much last year, in fact, ruled that the process by which an election commissioner should be selected must involve the creation of a kind of collegium where the PM would be one member and the leader of opposition would be the other. And the court suggested that the third member be the Chief Justice of India. And the logic behind this wasn't so much that the court is telling them who they should pick as a third member, but that the executive should not have a majority. And this is what the court suggested. But what the government finally legislated was something very different. And this is what people found surprising.
Yes, in fact, I wrote a letter to the President of India that this particular bill doesn't in any way comply with the advice given by the Supreme Court. But more important is, even if the Chief Justice is a member of the committee, still, how are the candidates? How is the panel prepared? What are the criteria? That should be in the public domain. And also, when the candidates' names are, when the panel is given to the committees, the selection committee, the candidates' antecedent, the background, should be in the public domain and to be available to the opposition leader, everybody. So, such kind of transparency will make it, the selection process much more objective. And that is very important. For example, the Chief Justice is a member of other committees or selection committees. Now, unless this kind of a process is followed, he won't know, what kind of a panel has come to him. So I think these are all things which any responsible government would do. Unfortunately, the way the government responded to the Supreme Court judgment on, selection of election commissioners was very pathetic. I think it shows a lack of, feeling of security. Sometimes I get the feeling that this government, this present political establishment, is not sure about itself. That's why that this kind of responses are very, very unfortunate.
So what you're saying is that it's not just the constitution of the selection panel itself, but the pre-selection process that is crucial, right? I mean, you're saying that how certain names of potential members of the election commission get chosen and vetted, all of that is important. And it's only when the members of the selection committee themselves have adequate information, and perhaps information also that they have a reasonable time to ponder over, that they can then make an informed selection, right? I mean, in this particular case, I think in the recent selection of 2 election commissioners, that was done curiously, and we still don't know the sort of reason behind the unexplained resignation of one of the election commissioners, I think Mr. Pandey, which then created 2 vacancies. But then you had the hurried selection of two election commissioners. And I believe the Congress member, the leader of the opposition, who was the third member, spoke about how he was barely given a couple of hours to go through these names. And even the search committees didn't spend all that much of time whittling down the total number of applications they had in order to present the selection committee with a short list of 6 or 7 names. So this is, you're right. I mean, this is a big problem.
The Prime Minister and the Union Cabinet Minister, I don't know whether the Union Cabinet Minister had the freedom to record a minute of dissent in this government. I'm not very sure about that. But, even after all this, the 3 election commissioners who are there, they should know that their selection has come under judicial scrutiny. They should know that their selection is questioned by the public at large. So at least, they should have some introspection on this. And they must try to elevate, the level of functioning to that of a constitutional authority. I think it's unfortunate, that the election commission, the 3 election commissioners, they have not really come up to our expectations.
Do you think the Supreme Court ought to have been more assertive? I mean, last year when the matter came up before it, and it said in very clear terms that that having an independent election commission is part of the basic structure. And this is the fundamental right of a citizen to expect that the elections are conducted in a free and fair manner by an independent election commission, and that you can't have independence if the executive gets to pack the election commission. So the court gave a very, very clear constitutional logic. And then when the government passed the Election Commission Act, which clearly kind of went against the grain of that judgment, and people complained about this, shouldn't the court have intervened quickly so that the selection process itself could have been sorted out before the recent selection of 2 commissioners?
I expected that, but that didn't happen. In this case, when the bill was brought up, the NDA government never bothered to discuss with other political parties and the states who have got a stake in it, stake in democracy. So unfortunately, as I think Dr. Ambedkar, in his famous speech to the Constituent Assembly said, even if there is a bad constitution, if there are good people, it will be very good. And if there is a good constitution, if there are bad people, it will turn out to be very bad. And this is what's happening today.
Right. And somehow the system seems to have a knack of producing the worst people, selecting the worst people for the most important jobs. We've seen this across the board where, serious questions about possible trade-offs, for example, in the selection of the Lokpal, in the selection of the National Human Rights Commission chairman, or other people. These are crucial jobs that are meant to ensure, in the case of transparency and anti-corruption, in the case of the Lokpal, fight against corruption, in the case of the NHRC chair, to ensure protection of human rights. But we've seen that in post after post, the manner in which people are selected, raises questions about the process and I would say the motivation and role of the government here. And of course, many positions, important positions, are also left vacant. For example, the Scheduled Tribes Commission, the Scheduled Caste Commission, for ages. I think the Minorities Commission has been without members for ages. So the government seems to either want to pick pliant individuals who can deliver something to the government, which would be in complete violation of the spirit behind which these bodies were set up in the first place, or it chooses to leave them unstaffed and unoccupied simply as a means of downgrading the importance of these commissions. But Mr. Sharma, we are at the end of the time that we had. We've discussed today the role of the Election Commission, its failure to actually perform its role as an independent watchdog in the face of allegations of violations of the election law by the Prime Minister and others. And we've seen how this is linked to the manner in which individual Election Commission members are selected. I thank you very much for your time. And of course, as I mentioned before we began this interview, an important part of your letter to the election commissioners on a model code of conduct for them revolves around the physical conduct of the elections, which is the functioning of EVM machines, what to do with the VVPAT slips that are produced. So we will come back to you again, perhaps in a week's time, to discuss these crucial aspects of your suggestions to the Election Commission. And of course, I should remind our viewers that the question of EVMs and the use of VVPATs in the upcoming election is actively being litigated before the Supreme Court, and we are hoping that there would be some kind of a judgment before voting actually begins. But once again, Mr. Sharma, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.